Reading from my commentary on Berkhof's Intro to the Bible from the second and third general epistles of John. The commentary was formed as follows. Content 1. The second epistle. Berkhof describes the content of this brief epistle addressed to the elect lady whom the writer loves, quote, in the truth, unquote. One might guess that the lady was Mary, Mother of God, as the saying goes, or at least Mary, Mother of the Lord, and her children such as James and Jude. James was martyred too early for the writer of this epistle, though, and so perhaps Jude and other siblings of the Lord were referenced. Well, at any rate, Berkhof describes the content as commending the Christian walk of some of her children and warning her not to let deceivers enter the church, bringing false doctrines to lead the elect astray. 2. The third epistle. The author writes into Gaius, or Gagius, as Berkhof has it in another brief letter, commending him for receiving and well-treating the brethren, and also warning him about one Diotrephes, who received the brethren not, and put himself above others. John, the author, says he will square Diotrephes away if he comes and gives a commendation to Demetrius. Characteristics. The two epistles appear very much to be personal letters on church-related affairs. Berkhof mentions them as twin letters of about equal size. One would think that John must have composed others that didn't survive through history. Berkhof writes that they have affinity with 1 John, sharing some terms. Authorship. Berkhof writes that, quote, considering the brevity of these epistles, their authorship is very well attested. Clement of Alexandria speaks of the second epistle, and according to Eusebius, also commented on the third. Irenaeus quotes the second epistle by name, ascribing it to John, the Lord's disciple, unquote. Tertullian and Cyprian contain no quotations from them, but Dionysius of Alexandria, Athanasius, and Didymus receive them as the work of the apostles, still quoting from Berkhof. The Muratorian canon, in a rather obscure passage, mentions two epistles of John besides the first one. The Bushido does not contain them, and Eusebius, without clearly giving his own opinion, reckons them with the Antilegomena. After his time, they were generally received, and as such recognized by the councils of Laodicea 363, Hippo 393, and Carthage 397. Unquote. Berkhof writes that internal evidence supports Johannine authorship, though some have an opinion that a presbyter John wrote the letters because of the way the author refers to himself. Then Berkhof elaborates the substance of that hypothesis before dismissing it. Elsewhere, Berkhof mentioned that Jewish synagogue staff also had presbyters. Destination. Berkhof writes, the second epistle is addressed, in quotes, the second epistle is addressed to whom he loves, and not only I, but all those that know the truth. 1:1. There is a great deal of uncertainty about the interpretation of the address. On the assumption that the letter was addressed to an individual, the following renderings have been proposed. 1. To an elect lady. 2. To the elect lady. 3. To the elect curia. 4. To the lady electa. 5. To electa curia. The first of these is certainly the simplest and the most natural one, but considered as the address of an epistle, it is too indefinite. To our mind, the second, which seems to be grammatically permissible, is the best of all the suggested interpretations. Unquote. I suppose a wealthy widow or wife of a wealthy individual who supported the Christian church may have been the recipient of the letter, yet that seems socially a little dubious to me. Instead, I think it possible that John, writing from distant Ephesus, may have actually written the letter to Mary, one of the relatively few women that would have commanded such a letter from the apostle. Mary, before the Holocaust, that is, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D., may have been a widow with siblings of the Lord still actively acting in the church, such as James and Jude. Maybe John felt it useful to provide some moral support for the elect lady who he loved in truth. If she was still alive circa 65 A.D., she may have married at quite an early age 12 or so, and still been alive at the destruction of Jerusalem. Composition, occasion, and purpose. Berkhof believes the letter may have been written to one of the churches of Asia Minor, for whom the church at Ephesus, John's probable location, could have been referred to as a sister. If the letter was written to Mary, my idea, then it might have been after James was martyred, before the destruction of Jerusalem, and perhaps in the 60s, when Mary might have been about 71 or so years of age. A letter sent by the disciple and apostle John to Mary, the mother of Jesus, might have been regarded as important enough to assure its survival through the turmoil of the period. The second epistle was a warning about teachers of false doctrine, and the third epistle, thanks for treatment of traveling brethren, as well as a warning about one Diotrephes who was inhospitable to the brethren and some kind of put himself above others sort of individual. Time and place. Thus, Berkhof places the time and place as sometime during the 25 years that John spent living in Ephesus during the latter part of his life. Berkhof writes about the canonical significance that the canonicity of the letters was slow to arise. He wrote, quote, "There was some doubt as to the canonicity of these epistles. The Alexandrian church generally accepted them. Clement, Dionysius, and Alexander of Alexandria all recognized them as canonical, though Origen had doubts. Irenaeus cites a passage from the second epistle as John's. Since neither Tertullian nor Cyprian quoted them, it is uncertain whether they were accepted by the North African church. The Meritorian fragment mentions 2 letters of John in a rather obscure way. In the Syrian church they were not received, since they were not in the Peshitta, but in the 4th century Ephraim quotes both by name. Eusebius classed them with the Antilegomena, but soon after his time they were universally accepted as canonical. The Peshitta, unquote. The Peshitta is a 2nd century Syriac translation, probably of the Greek version for the New Testament and from Hebrew for the Old. Of the Bible, it excluded these 2 epistles as well as Jude, 2 Peter, and the Revelation that were later included in the Harklian version of 1616 AD. Syriac language was a dialect of Eastern Aramaic from around Edessa, according to a Wikipedia article. In that article, reference is made to the Curetonian text of 5th century fragments with text dating to as early as the 100s AD. This text was probably put together in the Antioch, Syria, a place where Christians were first given that name. Berkhof writes that the primary value of the first epistle is its affirmation that true rather than false doctrine is necessary for Christians. The second letter is an example of the importance of having a right relationship with Christian brothers and sisters with practical hospitality.